Anne of the Island, Chapter 5, Letters from Home. For the next 3 weeks, Anne and Priscilla continued to feel as strangers in a strange land. Then suddenly everything seemed to fall into focus. Redmond, professors, classes, students, studies, social doings. Life became homogeneous again, instead of being made up of detached fragments. The freshmen, instead of being a collection of unrelated individuals, found themselves a class, with a class spirit, a class yell, class interests, class antipathies, and class ambitions. They won the day in the annual arts rush against the sophomores, and thereby gained the respect of all the classes and an enormous confidence-giving opinion of themselves. For 3 years the sophomores had won in the rush. That the victory of this year perched upon the freshmen's banner and was attributed to the strategic generalship of Gilbert Blythe, who marshaled the campaign and originated certain new tactics which demoralized the softs and swept the freshmen to triumph. As a reward of merit, he was elected president of the freshman class, a position of honor and responsibility, from a fresh point of view at least, coveted by many. He was also invited to join the Lambs, Redmondese for Lamb Theta, a compliment rarely paid to a freshman. As a preparatory initiation ordeal, he had to parade the principal business streets of Kingsport for a whole day, wearing a sunbonnet and a voluminous kitchen apron of gaudy flowered calico. This he did cheerfully, doffing his sunbonnet with courtly grace when he met ladies of his acquaintance. Charlie Sloane, who had not been asked to join the Lambs, told Anne he did not see how Blythe could do it, and he, for his part, could never humiliate himself so. "Fancy Charlie Sloane in a calico apron and a sunbonnet," giggled Priscilla. "He'd look exactly like his old grandmother Sloane." Gilbert, now, looked as much a man in them as in his own proper habiliments. Anne and Priscilla found themselves in the thick of the social life of Redmond. That this came so speedily was due in great measure to Philippa Gordon. Philippa was the daughter of a rich and well-known man, and belonged to an old and exclusive Blue-Nose family. This, combined with her beauty and charm, a charm acknowledged by all who met her, promptly opened the gates of all cliques, clubs, and classes in Redmond to her. And where she went, Anne and Priscilla went too. Phil adored Anne and Priscilla, especially Anne. She was a loyal little soul, crystal free from any form of snobbishness. "Love me, love my friends" seemed to be her unconscious motto. Without effort, she took them with her into her ever-widening circle of acquaintanceship, and the two Avonlea girls found their social pathway at Redmond made very easy and pleasant for them, to the envy and wonderment of the other freshets, who, lacking Philippa's sponsorship, were doomed to remain rather on the fringe of things during their first college year. To Anne and Priscilla, with their more serious views of life, Phil remained the amusing, lovable baby she had seemed on their first meeting. Yet, as she said herself, she had heaps of brains. When or where she found time to study was a mystery, for she seemed always in demand for some kind of fun, and her home evenings were crowded with callers. She had all the beaux that heart could desire, for 9/10 of the freshmen and a big fraction of all the other classes were rivals for her smiles. She was naively delighted over this, and gleefully recounted each new conquest to Anne and Priscilla, with comments that might have made the unlucky lovers' ears burn fiercely. "Alec and Alonzo don't seem to have any serious rivals yet," remarked Anne teasingly. "Not one," agreed Philippa. "I write them both every week and tell them all about my young men here. I'm sure it must amuse them, but of course the one I like best I can't get. Gilbert Blythe won't take any notice of me, except to look at me as if I were a nice little kitten he'd like to pat. Too well I know the reason. I owe you a grudge, Queen Anne. I really ought to hate you, and instead I love you madly, and I'm miserable if I don't see you every day. You're different from any girl I ever knew before. When you look at me in a certain way, I feel what an insignificant, frivolous little beast I am, and I long to be better and wiser and stronger. And then I make good resolutions, but the first nice-looking manny who comes my way knocks them all out of my head. Isn't college life magnificent? It's so funny to think I hated it that first day. But if I hadn't, I might never really got acquainted with you. And please tell me over again that you like me a little bit. I yearn to hear it." "I like you a big bit, and I think you're a dear, sweet, adorable, velvety, clawless little kitten," laughed Anne. "But I don't see when you ever get time to learn your lessons." Phil must have found time, for she held her own in every class of her year. Even the grumpy old professor of mathematics, who detested co-eds and had bitterly opposed their admission to Redmond, couldn't floor her. She led the freshest everywhere except in English, where Anne Shirley left her far behind. Anne herself found the studies of her freshman year very easy, thanks in great part to the steady work she and Gilbert had put in during those 2 years passed in Avonlea. This left her more time for a social life, which she thoroughly enjoyed, but never for a moment did she forget Avonlea and the friends there. To her, the happiest moments in each week were those in which letters came from home. It was not until she had got her first letters that she began to think she could ever like Kingsport or feel at home there. Before they came, Avonlea had seemed thousands of miles away. Those letters brought it near and linked the old life to the new so closely that they began to seem one and the same, instead of two hopelessly segregated existences. The first batch contained 6 letters from Jane Andrews, Ruby Gillis, Diana Barry, Marilla, Mrs. Lynde, and Davy. Jane's was a copperplate production, with every T nicely crossed and every I precisely dotted, and not an interesting sentence in it. She never mentioned the school, concerning which Anne was avid to hear. She never answered one of the questions Anne asked in her letter, but she told Anne how many yards of lace she recently crocheted and the kind of weather they were having in Avonlea, and how she intends to have her new dress made, and the way she felt when her head ached. Ruby Gillis wrote a gushing epistle deploring Anne's absence, assuring her she was horribly missed in everything, asking what the Redmond fellows were like, and filling in the rest with accounts of her own harrowing experiences with her numerous admirers. It was a silly, harmless letter, and Anne would have laughed over it had it not been for the postscript. "Gilbert seems to be enjoying Redmond, judging from his letters," wrote Ruby. "I don't think Charlie is so stuck on it." So Gilbert was writing to Ruby. Very well. He had a perfect right to, of course. Only Anne did not know that Ruby had written the first letter and that Gilbert had answered it from mere courtesy. She tossed Ruby's letter aside contemptuously, but it took all Diana's breezy, newsy, delightful epistle to banish the sting of Ruby's postscript. Diana's letter contained a little too much Fred, but it was otherwise crowded and crossed with items of interest, and Anne almost felt herself back in Avonlea while reading it. Marilla's was a rather prim and colourless epistle, severely innocent of gossip or emotion. Yet somehow it conveyed to Anne a whiff of the wholesome and simple life at Green Gables, with its savour of ancient peace and the steadfast, abiding love that was there for her. Mrs. Lynde's letter was full of church news. Having broken up housekeeping, Mrs. Lynde had more time than ever to devote to church affairs and had flung herself into them heart and soul. She was at present much worked up over the poor supplies they were having in the vacant Avonlea pulpit. "I don't believe any but fools enter the ministry nowadays," she wrote bitterly. "Such candidates as they've sent us, and such stuff they preach. Half of it ain't true, and what's worse, it ain't sound doctrine. The one we have now is the worst of the lot. He mostly taxes a text and preaches about something else. Then he says he doesn't believe all the heaven will be eternally lost. The idea! If they won't, all the money we've been given to foreign missions will be clean wasted, that's what. Last Sunday night, he announced that next Sunday he'd preach on the axe head that swam. I think he'd better confine himself to the Bible and leave sensational subjects alone. Things have come to a pretty pass if a minister can't find enough in Holy Writ to preach about, that's what. What church do you attend, Anne? I hope you go regularly. People are apt to get so careless about church going away from home, and I understand college students are great sinners in this respect. I'm told many of them actually study their lessons on Sunday. I hope you'll never sink that low, Anne. Remember how you were brought up, and be very careful what friends you make. You never know what sort of creatures are in them colleges. Outwardly, they may be as whited sepulchres and inwardly as ravening wolves. That's what. You better not have anything to say to any young man who isn't from the island. I forgot to tell you what happened the day the minister called here. It was the funniest thing I ever saw. I said to Marilla, if Anne had been here, wouldn't she have had a laugh? Even Marilla laughed. You know, he's a very short, fat little man with bow legs. Well, that old pig of Mr. Harrison's, the big tall one, had wandered over here that day again and broke into the yard, and it got into the back porch, unbeknownst to us, and it was there when the minister appeared in the doorway. It made one wild bolt to get out, but there was nowhere to bolt except between them bow legs. So there it went. And, being as it was so big and the minister so little, it took him clean off his feet and carried him away. His hat went one way and his cane another, just as Marilla and I got to the door. I'll never forget the look. And that poor pig was near scared to death. I'll never be able to read that account in the Bible of the swine that rushed madly down the steep place into the sea without seeing Mr. Harrison's pig careening down the hill with that minister. I guess the pig thought he had that old boy on his back instead of inside of him. I was thankful the twins weren't about. It wouldn't have been the right thing for them to have seen the minister in such an undignified predicament. Just before he got to the brook, the minister jumped off, or fell off. The pig rushed through the brook like mad and up through the woods. Marilla and I run down and helped the minister get up and brushed his coat. He wasn't hurt, but he was mad. He seemed to hold Marilla and me responsible for it all, though we told them the pig didn't belong to us, and that had been pestering us all summer. Besides, what did he come to the back door for? You'd never caught Mr. Allen doing that. It'll be a long time before we get a man like Mr. Allen, but it's an ill wind that blows no good. We've never seen hoof nor hair of that pig since, and it's my belief we never will. Things are pretty quiet in Avonlea. I don't find Green Gables as lonesome as I expected. I think I'll start another cotton warp quilt this winter. Mrs. Silas Sloane has a handsome new apple leaf pattern. When I feel that I must have some excitement, I read the murder trials in the Boston paper my niece sends me. I never used to do it, but they're real interesting. The States must be an awful place. I hope you'll never go there, Anne. But the way girls roam over the earth now is something terrible. It always makes me think of Satan in the book of Job, going to and fro and walking up and down. I don't believe the Lord ever intended it, that's what. Davy's been pretty good since you went away. One day he was bad and Marilla punished him by making him wear Dora's apron all day. Then he went and cut all Dora's aprons up. I spanked him for that, and then he went and chased my rooster to death. The McPhersons have moved down to my place. She's a great housekeeper and very particular. She's rooted all my June lilies up because she says they make a garden look so untidy. Thomas set them lilies out when we were married. Her husband seems a nice sort of man, but she can't get over being an old maid, that's what. Don't study too hard, and be sure to put your winter's underclothes on as soon as the weather gets cool. Marilla worries a lot about you, but I tell her you've got a lot more sense than I ever thought you would have had at one time, and that you'll be all right. Davy's letter plunged into a grievance at the start. Dear Anne, please write and tell Marilla not to tie me to the rail of the bridge when I go fishing. The boys make fun of me when she does. It's awful lonesome here without you, but great fun in school. Jane Andrews is crosser than you. I scared Mrs. Lynde with a jack-o'-lantern last night. She was awful mad, and she was mad because I chased her old rooster around the yard till he fell down dead. I didn't mean to make him fall down dead. What made him die, Anne? I want to know. Mrs. Lynde threw him into the pig pen. She might have sold him to Mr. Blair. Mr. Blair is giving 50 cents apiece for good dead roosters now. I heard Mrs. Lynde asking the minister to pray for her. What did she do that was so bad, Anne? I want to know. I've got a kite with a magnificent tail, Anne. Milty Boulter told me a great story in school yesterday. It is true. Old Joe Mosey and Leon were playing cards one night last week in the woods. The cards were on a stump, and a big black man, bigger than the trees, come along and grabbed the cards and the stump and disappeared with a noise like thunder. I'll bet they were scared. Milty says the black man was the old Harry. Was he, Anne? I want to know. Mr. Kimball over at Spencervale is very sick and will have to go to the hospital. Please excuse me when I ask Marilla if that's spelt right. Marilla says it's the asylum he has to go to, not the other place. He thinks he has a snake inside him. What's it like to have a snake inside you, Anne? I want to know. Mrs. Lawrence Bell is sick, too. Mrs. Lynde says that all that is the matter with her is that she thinks too much about her insides. I wonder, said Anne as she folded up her letters, what Mrs. Lynde would think of Philippa.